The New World, following the traumatic flood, Noah and his family and all life on the ark exit and begin a new world. Is this new world similar to the previous one, or has something changed? When we read the verses following Noah's exit from the ark, we note that there are several commands/promises to Noah. These, in the tradition of the sages, have been construed as part of what they call the commandments of the sons of Noah in Hebrew, Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach, the 7 commandments that were given to Noah, an important concept in which the sages assume correctly, based on the verses, that commandments were given to all of humanity, even prior to the election of Abraham and the beginning of the Jewish people. And from this, we already learn that God has, of course, expectations from all of humanity and has indeed given commandments that relate to all human beings. This is the concept within the world of the sages, and they've numbered them to be 7 commandments. In the simple reading, not the midrashic sage reading, we indeed see commandments, but I believe their numbers are fewer, and we'll try to indeed read the verses and understand what commandments were given to Noah himself. According to the sages, according to some opinions, some of these commandments that they construed as the 7 commandments were already given to Adam. But when we're trying to read based on what's explicitly stated in the text, we see several commandments given to Noah. So let's pick it up from Noah's exit from the ark. He's commanded to leave, and as he leaves, God makes him a promise as well as gives him certain commandments. So we're reading from chapter 8 in Genesis, verse 18 and onwards. So Noah came out together with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives. Every animal, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that stirs on earth came out of the ark by families. Then Noah built an altar to God, and taking of every pure animal and of every pure bird, he offered burnt offerings on the altar. God smelt the pleasing odor, and God resolved, never again will I doom the earth because of humankind, since the devisings of the human mind are evil from youth, nor will I ever again destroy every living being as I have done. So hence we see God's response to Noah's offering. He promises in verse 22, so long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So we basically have a promise from God that he won't intervene in the natural flow of nature, and he will never again destroy all life forms, right? And this is in cognizance of man's evil inclination, since the devisings of the human mind are evil from youth. In Hebrew, ki yetzer lev ha'adam ra minehorav, and as such, God says, since humanity has these evil inclinations, he will not be as strict, will be more forgiving, and will not destroy all life forms. So here is the first dramatic difference of the new world. We at least have a promise that there will not be another calamity which will, on the part of God, destroy the whole world. Just take note, God's promise is that he will not destroy. Never again will I doom the earth because of human being. And he says, so long as the earth endures, then he won't intervene in nature. Of course, that doesn't preclude the possibility that humans themselves will, God forbid, destroy all life, right? So we still have a responsibility, but God from his side has promised not to bring another calamity, another destruction that will destroy all of life forms. That is the first dramatic difference of the new world. We move on to chapter 9. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fertile and increase and fill the earth." And here we have the command and blessing of fertility on the part of humanity. This, of course, contradicts the understanding in the ancient Near Eastern parallels to the flood, where the gods were apparently unhappy about the increase and spreading of humanity and all the noise that it causes. Here we can see in the Torah the emphasis that God very much wants humans to be fertile and increase, right? The command of Pru the command which was already given to Noah and now to Adam, and now again repeated to Noah. So that's not different. But then there is an interesting twist in the continuation of that blessing. The fear and the dread of you shall be upon all beasts of the earth and upon all birds of the sky, everything with which the earth is astir, and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand. So that kind of parallels what was said to Adam, where humans will be able to rule over other life creatures. But in the following verse, in verse 3, suddenly there is an addition. Not only are they given into your hands, but also every creature that lives shall be yours to eat. As with the green grasses, I give you all these. So here there is another elaboration in relation to human control over animals, which includes the right to eat. And now man can eat animals as he had the right to eat the green grasses, right? And that's based on the translation of the Hebrew keyerek esev, as the green grasses that were given to man to eat. Adam was given rights to eat from everything, from all vegetation. Now God tells Noah, you can now eat animals as you ate vegetation prior. So here we have a dramatic development here. If you will, if up till now there was only falafel stores open, now the shawarma is already available as well, right, with Noah. Because up till now, humans, at least according to the permission given to God, were vegetarian. And now with Noah, suddenly they are given permission to eat meat. So that is a second very dramatic change that occurs. We continue on in verse 4. You must not, however, eat flesh with its lifeblood in it. Now, this is a translation based, I believe, on a simple reading of the verse in the Hebrew. Ach basar benafsho damo lo tochelu. You must not, however, eat flesh with its lifeblood in it. So, taken simply, this would seem to be a prohibition of eating blood, which is interesting. We know that there is a separate commandment in the Torah with regard to the Jews, the prohibition of eating blood, right? This is a very severe prohibition. Part of the laws of kosher foods is making sure that there is no blood left in the meat. Hence, there are not only rules relating to how the animal is slaughtered, but also how the meat is salted in order to expel the blood, since it's a very severe prohibition, including a punishment that is called karet, being cut off from the nation, which of course accentuates the severity. Hence, those familiar, even when opening eggs, right, according to the Jewish tradition and law, the egg is checked that there is no blood in it. To that extent, right, is care taken not to eat blood. That is a simple reading, but usually in Jewish law, this prohibition is related only to Jews, even though in the simple reading it seems to relate to all of humanity. Very severe attitude towards eating blood, blood symbolizing life. It's explicit in the prohibition um, and the laws relating to blood further on in the Torah. Ki hadam hu hanefesh, for the blood is the life form, right? The essence of life, and that is prohibited. So that's the understanding, and indeed, Rabbi Saadia Gaon, the very early Jewish commentator, originally from Egypt, and then moving to Persia, then what is present-day Iraq, part of the Mesopotamian, Babylonian, right, area. So he understood it as translated. There was a prohibition of eating blood, as well, that relates to all humanity. However, in the Jewish tradition, this verse is understood differently. The bet of benafsho, right, is not translated or understood as with his lifeblood, but rather the bet is while, not with, but while. But meat, while it is alive with its blood, life, you shall not eat. And hence this is understood in the midrashic halachic interpretation as referring to the prohibition of taking an organ, part of the meat of an animal, while it's still alive. The animal has to be slaughtered, and then you may eat from it. It has to be dead. You cannot eat an organ, part of the animal, while it is still living. What is called in Hebrew ever min hachai. That is how it is understood in the Jewish law. But I agree with the translation. The simpler reading is that this is a prohibition on eating blood. So that is a third rule, prohibition of blood, or the prohibition of eating part of an animal while it is still alive. And then there's an additional fourth rule. But for your own life, blood, I will require a reckoning. I will require it of every beast, of humankind too. Will I require a reckoning for human life, of everyone for each other? Whoever sheds human blood, by human hands shall that one's blood be shed. For in the image of God was humankind made. So here we also have a law relating to the spilling of human blood. And here the verse states that God will punish, right, whoever spills human blood. He'll even punish beast. Even if a beast attacks an animal, attacks a human, right, it shall be punished. And of course, from every human. And we can see here the nice chiastic verse, right? The Hebrew is shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yishafech. I'll translate it literally, right? It's close to the translation, but not exact as far as the word ordering. The shedder of blood of a human, by a human shall his blood be shed, right? And the beauty of this verse is its chiastic structure, right? It begins with the shedder and ends shall be shed, right? The shedder of blood, right? Of a human, by a human shall his blood be shed, right? You can see the shedder, first and last word, blood, second and second to last word, and Adam, human, third and then third to last word. Right, so we can see Adam, Adam, Dam, Dam, Shofech, Shofech. That chiastic structure shows kind of the measure for measure. Now, what does this verse basically state? Here we have a great novelty. Most people reading this verse think that the novelty is that there will be a death punishment for the spilling of human blood. However, I don't think that that is the whole novelty here. It's not only that there's a death penalty, right? That's stated explicitly here, but rather what's interesting is who will carry out that death penalty. So the verse says, whoever sheds human blood, by human hands shall that one's blood be shed. In other words, it kind of imposes the responsibility for judging or punishing the murderer upon humans. Humans shall carry out that death penalty. Continuation of the verse gives an explanation for this change. By human hands shall that one's blood be shed. For in the image of God was humankind made. Right, the Hebrew B'Tselem Elohim Asayat Adam. What does this come to explain? So, in my mind, I believe there is a double entendre, two meanings to this statement. It comes to explain, on the one hand, the severity of the spilling of human blood. Why is human blood more severe than animal blood? The reason being because humans are in the image of God. There is a substantial qualitative, right, difference and gap between animal life and human life. Only humans are in the image of God, and hence God relates very severely to the spilling of human blood and requires, right, humans to punish by death he who spills and murders humans. Once again, we have the conclusion, be fertile then and increase, the emphasis on the command of multiplying, abound on earth and increase on it. And then the continuation, and God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and your offspring to come, and with every living thing that is with you, etc. I will maintain my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God further said, this is the sign that I set for the covenant between me and you and every living creature with you for all ages to come. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall serve as a sign of the covenant between me and earth, and so forth. God promises not to bring another flood, and this is further affirmed in the form of a covenant with its sign, with its symbol, and that is the rainbow in the clouds, right? Some have explained the logic behind this as the sign, the rainbow as a sign for a promise of not bringing another flood. In its shape, the rainbow is like a bow, right? Which is an attack weapon, the bow and arrow. But in its shape, if it is, let's say, emanating from the sky, it's actually its form is directed upwards and not against the earth, right? So this was actually a sign of basically a stoppage of war when if you turn the attack weapon backwards, right? So the bow is flipped over and not towards the enemy. So here it's as if God says, I have stopped fire. I will no longer bring, right, a flood upon the earth. And that, of course, connects with the first change that we mentioned, right, at the end of chapter 8, and that is the promise that there will no longer be another calamity destroying the whole earth. So if we summarize, I think we can see four changes in the new world, right? The first was further formalized in the form of the covenant, the rainbow covenant, the promise not that God will no longer destroy the whole world, will no longer bring another flood, as he did in the time of Noah. The second novelty is the permission to eat meat. The third rule in the New World is the prohibition of eating blood, or in the understanding of the sages, the prohibition of eating an organ from a living animal. And the fourth is the command to punish by death the one who spills human blood, right? And that is to be carried out by humans. So it is a slightly different world. And the question that I want to raise here is, how are we to understand the relationship between these four new rules governing the world after the flood, the post-diluvian new world? It's clear that at least some of these commandments don't stand alone, but are related one to the other. Most prominent connection being the connection between the second rule and the third and the fourth. Namely, the connection between the permission to eat meat and the two prohibitions following. Namely, one, the limitation of not eating blood or not an organ from the animal that is still alive. And then also the strict attitude towards spilling of human blood, right? And the punishment by death of whoever spills human blood. You can see the connection between rules 2, 3, and 4, even linguistically in the Hebrew. If we go back to the formulation, it's particularly evident in the Hebrew, less so in the translation, because the translation, unfortunately, is not consistent. But if you look, following verse 3, which gives permission to eat, right? Every creature that lives shall be yours to eat. Verse 4 begins with the word ach, as does verse 5, ve'ach, right? Unfortunately, the translation here was not consistent, but these two verses should have also begun in English with a similar word. I guess for alternating and stylistic considerations, they translate the words differently, once by the word however, and the second time by the word but. They should have used the same translation. They probably should have translated verse 4, but you must not eat flesh with its lifeblood in it. But for your own lifeblood, I will require a reckoning, right? Because that would parallel the Hebrew, the double, right, limitation, both times with the same word, ah. So the language, the word but or however, shows that verse 4 limits verse 3, as does verse 5. How are they interconnected? Well, it's obvious, right? I give you permission to eat meat, but not blood, or not meat from a living animal. That's the connection between 2 and 3. As for the fourth rule, well, I give you permission to kill animals to eat them, right? You have permission to eat animal flesh, but I don't allow, and I will act very severely in relation to the spilling of human blood, right? We can see the theme, the motif of blood repeating itself. So hence we can clearly see that 2, 3, and 4 are basically a package deal, right? What about the first rule? Is it totally separate? The promise that God makes not to bring a flood or a calamity upon humanity. Is that simply a rule that stands in and of itself because it's obviously related to God, a promise by God towards humanity? Or is it also in some way or another connected to at least one of these rules? I want to make the claim that there is a very intricate relationship between the promise that God makes not to bring another calamity with the last rule. Namely, there's a connection between rules 1 and 4. God saying that he will be very strict and will reckon any spilling of human blood includes also the demand that the spiller of human blood shall be punished by death, as we read in that beautifully chiastic verse. The shedder of blood of a human, by a human shall his blood be shed. In other words, to punish the murderer with the death penalty. This verse, like we said, has a double entendre. It, on the one hand, explains why spilling of human blood is more severe, because humans are in the image of God. But I believe it also explains why humans have the capacity to judge another human, a fellow human, to death. And the answer is because humans are in the image of God. In the image of God were humans made. And hence, just like God judges humans, humans who are in the image of God have the capacity to judge. So hence there is a double entendre in the explanation, right? For in the image of God was humankind made. It explains both why it is so severe to spill human blood, but it also explains why humans can judge their fellow humans even to the death penalty. Now, if we connect this with the first change in the new world, namely God promising not to bring a calamity upon earth, that basically involves God limiting his judgment of the earth. He takes a step back and says, I will not do as I did prior, right, in the flood. I will not destroy all of life. However, in tandem with God stepping back and limiting his own judgment upon all of humanity, he now basically obliges humanity to come in, step in, and take upon itself the responsibility of judging, right, the spiller of blood. So hence it is also a package deal. God says, I will limit my judgment, but as a consequence, I will, right, increase the responsibility of judgment that will be laid upon humans. And hence, rule number 4 of punishing the murderer connects, of course, with rules 2 and 3, the issue of the permission to slaughter animals for food, not for sport or for anything else, right? With the limitation of taking care not to spill human blood, but also connects with the change number 1, the promise that God makes not to judge the world, saying, I will not judge, but now humans will have a greater responsibility, right, to judge. And I believe in light of these new rules, we may and we may have a greater understanding and infer from them what was the major cause for the flood. Seems to be in light of these rules that there was a lot of spilling of human blood, and that is eventually what led to the decision by God to destroy the world. And indeed, we see this, of course, in the chapters prior to the flood, both in the story of Cain and Abel, the murder of Abel by Cain, and also later on in the Song of Lamech, where basically he says that he has has killed more people, and his need for security is far greater, and protection by God is far greater, right? Because if Cain was promised that whoever strikes Cain will be avenged sevenfold, so Lamech said he needs 77-fold protection. We see, right, the deterioration into murder and blood spilling, and hence here we can see in the New World a very strict attitude towards the spilling of human blood and the responsibility that humans have to punish the murderers. So we can see that this is an intricate set of rules that govern the new world. The question which I'm deliberating and not certain about is how to relate to these rules. What do they say in relation to humanity? How are we to understand them? Are they to be viewed as a progress on the side of humanity, or perhaps on the flip side, perhaps a lessening of expectations? And I think it to be taken in both ways. And perhaps we can focus on that ambivalence in the change and the permission that humans were given to eat animals. How are we to approach that? Why is there this change? Earlier Middle Age commentators, including Rabbi David Kimchi, Radak, who lived in Provence. His family was originally from Spain, but moved to Provence, to southern France, the area of Narbonne. He lived in the late 12th century, from about 1160 to 1235. Radak, as well as the Chizkuni, Rabbi Chizkiah ben Manoach, who lived in France, in northern France, in the 13th century, approximately between 1250 and 1310. Both of them go in a similar direction and explain this change as emanating from what Noach did in the ark. Animals survived the flood only as a consequence of Noach's having looked after them, having built an ark and provided food for them while in the ark. And hence, they explain God now gives dominion and total control over animals because their existence was totally dependent and a consequence of humans looking after them. And hence, now God says, I give you even permission and dominion over their life. You can eat the animals as well. Viewed in this light, this is definitely progress. Humans did a lot, and therefore their status has arisen. They even have total dominion over animals. Others have viewed this, amongst them the modern 20th century, late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, Rabbi Kook, who came to Israel and was the first chief rabbi of Israel, right, who viewed this as a negative development. And he actually viewed vegetarianism as the ideal, right? He wrote a booklet about the vision of vegetarianism, Chazon Tzimchonut, and indeed wrote that he believes in the future, in messianic times, there will be a return to vegetarianism. Animals will not be sacrificed, but only sacrifices will emanate from vegetation, from the flour and wheat given, right? And he sees this as a deterioration. God sees that humans failed in the first round prior to the flood. They were too violent, and perhaps there is a certain urge or need for flesh, right, that humans cannot overcome. And then, therefore, God basically lessens his expectations, lowers his expectations, and says, because of this inclination for flesh, for meat, I give you permission to eat meat. However, beware and don't eat blood, a limitation of on blood, because blood symbolizes life, as well as, of course, being very severe and strict in relation to the spilling of human blood. So we can see within amongst the rabbis throughout the generations different attitudes. Is this progress? Is this new world an advance, or perhaps a regression and a lowering of expectations? Similarly, the fact that God limits his judgment upon earth can be viewed as in either a positive light. God has given more responsibility to humans. Humans now, because they're in the image of God, right, have greater responsibility to take care of the world, and they even have the capacity of judging, of filling in the role that God had in judgment. Or it could be viewed in a negative light as a statement that humans aren't worthy and cannot stand and exist before a total divine judgment, and hence there is a need for God, I guess, to mediate and lessen his total judgment upon earth, and therefore set some of the responsibility upon humans. Is the handing of the responsibility for judgment a forward progress in humanity, or perhaps is if you will, a mark of Cain that humanity is not capable of withstanding divine judgment? And I can't be totally definite in coming to a conclusion regarding this question. Perhaps there is that double entendre as well, not only in the explanation, right, for an image of God were humans created, but also in how we view these laws in general, right, as we saw in the verses, right, there the promise that God makes not to destroy is explained because of man's tendency towards evil, right? Right. The explanation in verse 21 in God's promise after smelling Noah's offering, he will not again doom the earth because of humankind, since the devisings of the human mind are evil from youth. Right? Humans have a tendency towards evil, which is not, of course, a very complimentary description of humanity. On the flip side, we also have the emphasis of in the image of God were humans created. So we see that the new world is not the same as the world prior to the flood. Things have changed. God wants humanity to multiply, right? And hence the repetition of the command to be fruitful and multiply. But the new world now is governed by different rules, which, amongst others, on the one hand, promise that, at least from God's perspective, he won't destroy the whole world. But on the flip side, there is greater responsibility for humans to ensure that human blood is not spilt. There is greater permission, or perhaps a lowering of expectation, however we approach it, in allowing humans to eat animal flesh, right? But severe restrictions with regard to, in the simple reading, the eating of blood, symbolizing life. I give you flesh, meat, but not blood. Or, according to the rabbis, limitations, you must make sure that the animal is dead. You can't eat an organ from a living animal. And even more severe, right? God saying, I will not tolerate the spilling of human blood, and I give that responsibility over to humans, right, to make sure that human blood is not spilt as it was prior in the world that existed prior to the flood.